Yes, join us on stage. Hello and good afternoon all. I'll invite the panel to sit down. Can I get a warm round of applause already? Thank you. Have a seat. Estoy encantado de estar aquí todos. It's always a pleasure to be in Barcelona. Unfortunately, I brought the weather from Amsterdam and Berlin. Apologies for that. But we're not going to talk about the weather today. We're going to talk about a lot of things. And we have some of the most respected international VCs here today on the panel. And I'm really happy to introduce them one by one. And I'll give them the fair chance to introduce themselves before we dive into the question part. On the topics, we're going to talk about demystifying VC. What's the state of tech here in Europe as opposed to, for example, in the US? There's an abundance of capital in the market today. How does that impact valuations? How does that impact the way VCs interact? Do we actually add value? That's also a question we're going to ask our panel members. Before we kick it off, I myself am a former startup founder who turned to the dark side about 5 years ago. I'm currently the CEO of 01 Ventures. We're a deeptech VC based in Amsterdam and London, and we're targeting 150 million close that we're going to invest in bold and ambitious teams and engineers in deep tech, for example, in decentralization, intelligent IoT, machine learning, robotics, MR, VR, all the topics that we think are foundational and topics where Europe is perfectly aligned at the moment. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first panel member. I'm going to give the floor to Angel Bou from Inveready to introduce himself in 1 minute.
Wow. I'm the operating partner at Inveready. We are a fund that invests mostly in deep tech. You want me to, about my background, or 1 minute doesn't matter a lot? But since I'm an operating partner, we try to give value to all our companies, providing like what they think it's like help in many fields. So we are the type of VCs that don't give us just money. We try to be like CMO as a service, CFO as a service, many other services that bring them along to the next stage.
CEO as a service?
Sorry, CMO, CFO.
Oh, sorry, okay, yeah.
Well, also CEO could be sometimes.
Okay.
You know, they go very stressed. And so far, we're the type of VC that also very entrepreneur-friendly in the sense that we want to help them not dilute a lot with public funding and really taking them to the stage that these other guys are top serious funding can be comfortable with the company and how the company looks like.
Entrepreneur friendly. We're going to dive into that in a second, what that actually means. But about yourself, I mean, you've also been abroad quite a while. You just returned here in Barcelona.
Yeah, I've been mostly abroad for the past years in the Bay Area, so where I developed most of my career studying there. And I've been an entrepreneur 4 times. I work for startups, small startups, mid-sized startups, also pre-IPO and public companies. So I think that's part of what having crashed and raised and died and resourced from the ashes many times can really help companies.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Angel. Next up, Brochado from Atomico. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks. Hello, everyone. So I'm Carolina. I'm originally from Brazil. I moved to the US for university, ended up staying on the East Coast. Actually, it's not in the Valley for a long time, over 10 years. And moved to London about 5 years ago, where actually initially I worked at a startup, which failed, so there's lessons there. And I'm now at Atomico. I'm a partner on the investment team there. I'm sure we'll dive into a little bit the entrepreneur-friendly side, but Atomico was founded by Nicholas Enstrom, which is one of the co-founders of Skype. And the problem that we're trying to solve is both the lack of capital that we see still exists between Silicon Valley and the rest of the world, and also trying to get more operational experience of high caliber at companies at the time when they're scaling. So we've assembled quite a large team of people who have domain expertise in certain areas, who've been in companies like Google, Uber, et cetera, at the time when those companies were facing really fast growth, and have best practices that they kind of pass on to our companies. We typically invest at Series A and Series B. What that usually means is the point when a company has a product and early days of product market fit. And of course, in terms of series, that can really depend. But what we're looking for is amazing technology and really ambitious founders who want to create massive businesses.
Can you give us any examples of recent deals that you've done that you're proud of?
Yes, sure. So to mention a Spain one, we invested in a company called OnTruck, It's based out of Barcelona, of Madrid, but it's got a lot of business in Barcelona. It's a marketplace for trucks. And so it's connecting basically loads and companies to carriers. And so it's really using technology to increase utilization in that industry. So we're really proud of that. And, we're big fans of Spain, Madrid, Barcelona, and really happy to be here.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Caroline. Next up, Peter Specht, Creandum.
Hey, I'm Peter. I work for Creandum. I'm an investment manager in the Berlin office. Creandum is an early stage venture firm. We invest pan-European in seed, Series A and Series B. The fund is originally out of the Nordics. We have been around for roughly 15 years, investing in companies such as Spotify, iZettle, Vivino, or 8fit, which has a Spanish founder. So in total, around $500 million asset under management. And we got 3 offices: Berlin, where I'm based, Stockholm, and San Francisco. And my personal background is I also have some history here in Barcelona. So I spent some time at SADE during my studies. Afterwards, worked with Rocket Internet, Google, and Bain, before I joined the dark side at Creandum.
Awesome, great. Thanks so much, Peter. And last but not least, of course, Giovanni Nani from Far Capital.
Hi, thanks for being here. My name is Giovanni, and I'm with Frog Capital. I'm based in London. We are a venture capital fund focused on scale-up businesses. We look to invest at the Series B stage, late A, but B probably is the sweet spot. We look to invest in businesses that with a good track record, a proven business model, and that are looking for capital for growth acceleration, effectively. So we invest across Europe in both B2C, B2B businesses. We look for software-enabled business models. And about myself, I'm like with Peter, I'm a proud ESADE alumni. I moved to London after Barcelona about 7 years ago. I worked in banking, most recently at JP Morgan in investment banking and TMT coverage, and joined Frog last year.
Fantastic, thanks so much. Oh, let's dive into the main topic, and let's start by maybe clarifying which stage we're actually investing in. So there's an atomization of terms: seed, early, growth stage. What does it actually mean? So I think, Angel, you're the first ones to get in the game, professionally speaking. So what does it actually mean? Where does the team stand? How can they reach out to you? And what makes an investment decision for you?
Yeah, well, we are on the seed stage, which is probably the step right after the friends and family, and earlier than the Series A guys. So basically, we are very used to see companies that are just having the proof of concept, initial traction. Some don't even have traction, but they have probably very good potential technologies. That said, it's something that we make it very approachable to everyone. For us, in our case, which we invest in deep technology. Like enabling technologies, AI, NLPs, based on natural language, DevOps, cybersecurity. So we are pretty open on all that is deep tech, and I think we have to be very constantly open to all the channels, not only like whatever comes through the email, whatever comes through the event. Whatever comes to even through the partners, analysts.
You'll reply to all the emails you get?
I personally don't. I don't read even my boss emails.
Okay, that's interesting.
But I do read WhatsApp. So.
So WhatsApp or Messenger is actually better than email. That's the first real nice tip here.
But I do insist that, because physically we are very approached. Like I could talk to any company. We have other people within the company that are really trying to filter everything. So it's not that we probably don't check on the emails. Probably someone doesn't send me an email, since I'm very operational, like in doing marketing campaigns with companies, and say, hey, if you send an email to a prospect and they don't open it, that doesn't mean that they are not interested in you. It's probably you're not going through the right channel. So this is what I would like to tell everyone. Like we are approachable. Probably the right channel personally for me, it's not the email, but they can reach out through LinkedIn, through
Is it
through
a good
phone,
idea to reach out to you
through
when,
in person.
is it a good idea to reach out to you directly when we're off the stage? Is that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I would say that's the same for our team. It's just a matter of bandwidth and reaching out to any channels. But we try to filter absolutely everything. We try to look absolutely everything that we have, and we try to give answer to absolutely everything we receive.
Great. Before we go to Peter, one final question on the seed side. I mean, you have the most, I think, the most difficult role. You're assessing, determining technology of companies that, well, basically just exist. What is the trigger point? How do you make your decisions?
So usually, probably this might sound quite funny, but since we have a pretty broad structure, we find within Inveready a person who's the ambassador of the company that we might look to invest, sponsor, let's say that, and we call that the person that it's infected with this person, with this company, because it's someone that likes this company and has reasons to believe that that could be something. And the other ones are the ones in charge to attack them or to find things to rebate why.
Exactly. So it's like an internal battle with
so
one
it's an internal battle, but very healthy.
Yeah.
Not to try to mess up with the company. It's more like try to find a point like why. Probably because the different backgrounds are bringing different skills or different visions or minds on what that company could be. And usually we get an understanding on that sense.
Maybe this interview, before you go to Peter, just for the panel, and whoever wants to respond, please do. But I think there's a misconception in VC or from the startup's perspective that you need to talk to a general partner in order to get through, but you're talking about an ambassador. That could potentially be everyone, right? So an associate is the right way to go in if he becomes your local champion. So maybe Carolina?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You often find that founders only...
I don't think is the mic on? No, I don't think
Is
so.
it okay? Is it working now? Yeah.
Can you hear Carolina right
Can you
now?
hear me?
Yeah, okay,
Ross?
thanks.
I think oftentimes some founders say, I'll only take a meeting if it's with a partner, but our associates, we source across. So I think there's different kinds of firms. Some firms, partners don't source at all. They just take the deal flow from associates.
Yeah.
In ours, we all source, but our associates are huge powerhouses. They're at all the events. They have really good frameworks of thinking about what's a good business.
Yeah.
And so they're a really, really good way in for sure.
Yeah. Peter, so to take Creandum. So you're a bit later, right, than Inveready, I would say. So what makes a good investment decision for you? How do you build it towards that moment and decide on the investment?
Yeah, so how it typically works at Creandum. I mean, stage-wise, we're a little bit later than you guys at Inveready. We also do seed, but a lot of times do Series A rounds, which are, I would say, a ticket size for us from like 2 million up to 7 million.
Yeah.
And how it works is that on each, let's say, deal that is incoming or that is referred to us, we work in pairs or in like 2 to 3 people per deal. And those are kind of your ambassadors, and it's typically the ones that know the topic best. So if it's, let's say, marketplace, the 2 people in the team spend time on it that mostly deal with marketplaces. And basically, they do the due diligence process with you. And at some point, we bring it up to the full team, discuss it in the full team. Before we make any investment decisions, the founders come to present in front of our full investment committee, which consists of 10 members of the investment team, including our US guys that dial in for each meeting. And this is typically the time where we afterwards do decisions. Yeah. It's at Creandum, we are Nordic heritage. The Nordics are pretty much consensus driven, so it's often discussions, and we try to find common ground there. And I think that's how it works.
Thanks for being open and honest on the process. I think it more or less resembles the same for everyone on the stage, but it does sound like it's going to take a long time. So what does a founder need to expect in terms of length from A to closing? What's an average size? Time?
I mean, it really depends. I think the quickest you could expect is 2 to 3 weeks, but that's really the quickest.
2 to 3 weeks?
That's really the quickest.
That's fast.
Normal process is something from first contact until investment committee, until final decision. It's more something between 1 to 2 months.
Great.
I agree with what has been said. I also adding on the points on the associate, I would encourage not to discount interaction with associate or more junior people in the team, because having someone that can actually champion you internally, if you have a sponsor, even if it's whoever is internally, is always very valuable. And oftentimes these people are an initial filter, so definitely don't underestimate that. On the timing of the deal, probably quite similar. It's we tend to do quite a bit of work pre-term sheet, so that in the moment that we put a term sheet in front of a company, it's basically fully backed up. We try to put term sheet only when we have a good level of comfort. And from a term sheet perspective to closing, I think for us it typically would take 4 to 6 weeks. It's a little bit of a confirmatory diligence, but it definitely goes quite into the detail. Being a little bit later stage, we do quite a lot of work.
Do you do anything significantly different than, for example, what we do in the earlier phase with the Series B round, 10 million upwards? Is there anything different in the process, or what should a founder expect in terms of due diligence?
Yeah, no, sure. I think it's. I think maybe compared to earlier stage, at the earlier stage, probably people do even more work pre-term sheet, and post-term sheet is very much ticking the box, and kind of the conversion from term sheet to closing is very high. I think as you move later stage, this changes a little bit. As I was saying, we try to maximize clearly the conversion from term sheet to closing, but the level of diligence that you should expect later stage is certainly much more heavy. The question asked are much more difficult. It's very data-driven type of diligence. We use kind of some consultant. We come in with advisors and all the sorts of things, but it's.
Okay, maybe on the founder, it's a slightly different question, but just an interesting question to ask as well. I mean, what do you think? Does the founder or CEO need to reach out to you directly, or can he work via placement agency, intermediaries? What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, it's a mixed answer. I think it's. I'm surprised by how many intermediated processes we see. People using banks, advisors to raise even like a Series A or a Series B.
Yeah.
And we don't mind. We can participate on those. I would say it's definitely not the preferred option. No. We prefer when an opportunity comes in through the network. We are very open to meeting people outside the network. I think if it's a qualified lead, it's always much more appreciated. Yeah. But we see many Series B around being intermediated by advisors, and I think they can add value to the process. There is a risk oftentimes that there is a bit of a negative effect. If you see a company using an advisor for a Series B, you might think that they might have failed going direct. So be careful when you.
To be honest, I'm a bit biased about it myself. That's also why I'm asking the question. Maybe Carolina. So your take on it from your perspective. In the process that you do with Atomico, I mean, you have a heavily experienced team that might potentially make you, better fit, more equipped, a lot of deal flow, access to, a market. What percentage of a market do you want to see before you make the investment decision?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it does depend. At Atomico, we're actually challenging ourselves to be faster and faster. Yep. So we now have a goal to be able to do a kind of meeting to term sheet in 2 weeks. And we're trying to get there, because what we find is the most competitive deals are moving really fast. Yep. So obviously, ideally, what you'd love to do is go in with a thesis and be like, oh, now this company really matches our thesis, and then it's very easy to get the rest of the partnership across the line. Of course, that doesn't always happen, and sometimes the most opportunistic deals are the best, so we have to deal with those as well. But we try to be as open, and we're always trying to improve on this, but trying to be as open as possible with founders on what the process and the timeline is.
I think you raised an interesting point. So I mean, there's some startups, entrepreneurs, they have a lot of attention from VCs. How do you create that type of momentum? I mean,
that's right, and I was going to actually carry on from the intermediation point. I think in some markets, using intermediaries is the status quo. So what we find, for instance, in France, is a lot of the processes are intermediated, and that's just how it tends to be. I think if you're getting to Series B, it is very atypical for a founder who had traction to not have met a lot of VCs or a certain level of VCs, and then the ideal relationship is a relationship over time.
Yeah.
And so for us, for instance, if you're raising your Series B, we would have loved to have met you at seed, really, and then be tracking your business over time. Because obviously for a VC, what you'd love to do is see traction and invest, right? And not have to get into that competitive
Absolutely.
cycle.
You want to build up a relationship.
And for the founder, it makes it all that much faster. So, you know, the advice I would give is reach out to VCs. I think to the point of what's an effective channel, warm introductions, I think are still the most effective channel.
Still warm introductions, right?
Right, so angels in your market, other founders, other entrepreneurs, you know, you're always going to read those emails, you're always going to prioritize those meetings.
Yeah.
And get to know the VC over time, because at the end of the day, this is a really long-term relationship as well.
Yeah.
So you want to get to know the partner specifically or the firm more broadly for a period of time.
Would you say, I mean, since the startup scene has evolved in Europe quite a lot the last couple of years, especially also in the deep tech space, or let's say foundational technology next to marketplace e-commerce, where it was typically pretty difficult to compete with the US market. But would you say that because of the fact that the founders are improving, that it's tougher to judge which companies are actually better because they present themselves in a better way? Is that something, Peter, maybe have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the quality of pitches is something that definitely increased over time. I mean, there are more and more possibilities to get really, really good coaching also in early stages, be it accelerators, be it other founders that you talk to that you can rely on, be it trainings for this. And so I would say, yes, the quality is higher. The sources you can use as a reference for this is also getting larger and larger. But still, I mean, every company is really a very comprehensive decision on its own, and you really try to look at every company like pretty holistically, and so it's hard to say if that really changed, like if it's getting harder to, let's say, to decide or select.
No, I mean, well, you could say, I mean, if everyone gets better at pitching, then in essence a pitch becomes less valuable than a business card. So then what else do you assess? So how then do you assess the quality of a founding team or a CEO if everyone's pitching, pretty properly? But that's maybe a little bit more to integrate to details for now. Peter, so in your case, right? So let's say the Series B phase. Do you still have the original founding team, or?
Most of the time, yes. I think I'm just thinking of our companies. Yeah. Typically, most of the companies that we meet are still led by the founding team. It's some of our portfolio companies that maybe there have been changes. Other companies, we definitely are comfortable to see, to look at companies where maybe an external CEO has been brought on board.
Yeah.
We don't have any issues with that. We kind of our strapline is the CEO of VCs, so it's which has nothing against founders, but the idea is given that we are very much focused on that scale-up phase, we think one of the key challenges is really a founder transitioning to a CEO role.
Yeah.
Most of the time is the same person, but we think it's a different job, and kind of navigating that transition is one of the key challenges of scaling your business.
Yeah.
And so we talk a lot about CEOs in our world as opposed to founders, but most of the times are the same person.
Of course. Peter raised an interesting point just now about the technology or the team. So which is most important and why? Angel?
For us, I would say the team. As technologies evolve, and we'd like to see a team ready to evolve with the technology. But definitely.
Will that mean that you should allow them to cut corners in the early days and then pay the fines later on? Is that?
We are early stage. We've seen a lot of companies iterating so far. The technology grows. Sometimes they do. They have technology partnerships that helps up get shortcuts on their technology evolution. And the team, it's something that we really pay attention and we prepared also for them. We assess teams, and one of the questions that I ask is always, hey, you maybe are you ready to take your company from this stage to the Series A to Series B, but would you be able to step up, to step out on that stage? Because it's something that might happen, or something probably at C-level that you might have to change. And it's a hard question and it's a hard answer. But when we like to hear that the answer is yes, as this is the type of teams and CEOs that we value.
Would you agree with Angel on that?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think the team drives everything else. And that is a lot of secret sauce, right? I think
Yeah.
with technology, you put money and really smart people to work, and that gap can narrow. But
Yeah.
having teams who can navigate difficult situations, which are always going to happen, who can hire the best people, right? So one of the things that we look at, and one of the big things that we see that should differentiate a Series A from a Series B company is that bench,
Yeah.
right? And so even if you think of the example of Facebook and Zuckerberg, right? Like he didn't have to step away, but he found a Sheryl Sandberg that had done
Exactly.
it before, and
Who supposedly actually made it all happen, right? And made it into what it is today.
so
Good or bad, by the way. But,
yeah, and then the same, the founders of Google did the same thing, and
Yeah.
they stepped out, they stepped back in. So having founders who can attract that talent, work with that talent, always hire people better
Yeah.
than them, and not be threatened by that is a really key component.
On the topic of we're still talking about the whole process, how it works. What would you say is the ideal moment to start a particular venture in a technology? I mean, no competition, little competition, a lot of competition. What's ideal? Maybe Peter or anyone wants to respond on that?
Well, definitely they say no competition, it's bad path, but bad starting.
Yeah.
Since everyone has competition so far at some point, at some way. But, and actually it's this thing that we ask. So it's better not having a lot of competition.
Yeah. No, but is there still a thing as first mover advantage, or is it a disadvantage? Maybe Carola?
Yeah, what I'd say to that is I think if you're on a B2B side,
Yeah.
the first mover advantage is very big because it's inherently harder, the sales cycles are longer. So if you have a better technology, a better team, and you can run at it fast,
Yeah.
I think there's advantage to that. On the consumer side, I think it depends, and again, just to use the Google, Facebook example, it wasn't the first search engine, it wasn't the first, social network, but these things grow exponentially. So I think it all depends on cost and runway and those sorts of things. I think on the business-to-business side, it's pretty huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you really also need to look at where the competition is. I mean, is the competition in your vertical, in your geography? If there's competition in the US, for example,
Yeah.
I mean, that's if Europe is a large enough market, it can be substantially enough for you guys. And so yeah, it really depends on the case. But I think most of the startups that we see have some sort of competition, and then it's really the question: which do we think will be the winner
Yeah.
in this field?
Would you say it's an advantage? I mean, I meet a lot of startups, and then, for example, they're raising a small round, and then a competitor raises a 450 million round, and they're kind of upset about that. Would you say should they be, or is it actually a good sign? Should you,
No,
maybe Giovanni?
Yeah, on one end, certainly it does validate the model,
Yeah.
and then attracts more attention to the space. So
Yeah.
it can have some positive spin as well, but clearly it adds a big element of an additional element of risk if it's a very direct competitor. And on the other end, I think you should also be mindful of the fact that if a company raised a very, very large round, most kind of from an investor perspective, most likely that company is kind of really the exit options for that company will be very limited. So if you are maybe invested in the number one player in the market, having raised less money, you still have maybe more opportunity from an exit perspective in terms of valuation that can work, in terms of buyer that can sort of potentially buy you. So I mean, there are a number of considerations, but yeah, it's.
Would you say, for example, where we're talking about a little bit about valuations now, getting in early, getting in late, a lot of competition, not so much competition. If we look at our own play at the moment, there's an abundance of capital in the market today. Has that changed the way we operate? Do you see more and more pressure on deals, and if so, what has changed? Maybe from a value add perspective, we always talk about that we tend to add value to a founder's team in the beginning, but what does that mean, and has it changed because of the fact that you can also go for alternative solutions next to VC money?
I can kick that off. I think there's definitely more capital in the market, especially earlier stage. I think the gap is still pretty big when you start going later stage, which I think is really good for the ecosystem, which from our perspective is still undercapitalized. Obviously, that means more competition, and it means you as a venture fund have to differentiate yourself, which I think again is really good for companies and founders. I think when founders are assessing a VC firm, they have to assess the personal relationship, right, with the partner, but then the broader team. What we try to do is we try to have multiple touch points, so that the person on your board isn't the only person you're speaking to the operating partners, and we think that at that point, particularly at Series A, when you're taking something that is, a young product, potentially early days product market fit, lots of things to test out, that having access to that best practice and having access to a lot of capital does help and do become, competitive advantages for you in what often is, a really competitive market for these companies.
When should you not go for VC money?
My answer is more often than you think. I mean, especially in business models that have high gross margin. I'm thinking about software as a service, for example. There are, I think, many software as a service company that could run as an amazing bootstrap company, making fantastic revenue and also being a really, let's say, beneficial source for the founder in terms of returns. But not all, I would say not all markets are, let's say, from the size itself, VC compatible. I mean, as a venture capital list, you're always looking for the outliers, for the potential $500 million, billion-dollar companies. And frankly said, not every company market-wise has the potential to become this. And in this sense, it makes more often sense to actually not raise VC money than you think.
Okay, so what do you do then as an alternative? What, is there something, I mean, of course, there's crowdfunding. There's, you can do all kinds of things. Maybe Giovanni.
No, yeah, I agree with what you said. I think it's venture is not a product, or let's call it product, that it works for everyone. That's for sure. I think it's when you take up venture money, it's important you understand what type of journey you're signing up to, and it's very important to have alignment of interest in that. In terms of raising other source of capital, I think there are. These days, certainly, there are many more options, I would say. I think clearly crowdfunding, I think, has proven to be quite a decent source of capital for early stage. Looking at some numbers, I think I was surprised by the amount of crowdfunding that is going into both early stage at seed round, but as well a little bit later as well. And so I certainly think it's a very healthy way of funding your company, if for certain type of companies, for sure. And then there are clearly, I mean, other sources. I mean, depending on the model, you could think about debt and other.
But you see this as well, right? I think increasingly there's wealthy individuals and family offices that are who typically would have invested in a venture fund, who want to invest direct and may not want necessarily as big of a risk-return profile. So I think that's an interesting shift that's happening, in the LP landscape for venture funds, but also opportunities for startups, because more and more people, particularly people who made a lot of money in the older industries and realize what tech is doing, want to get their hands dirty and get in directly. So I wouldn't underestimate, family offices and wealthy individuals.
Maybe that's actually a good time to tap into something more technical. But I mean, I'm not the cap table. But let's say, you start your company, you raise your first angel round, friends, family, and fools. Let's say you dilute, you lose 5%. Then the next investor comes in 10%. Before you know it, 35, 40%. Do you look at that at all? And what does it influence your decision? And what should a founder typically have as an equity when they reach the Series A phase or further on? Or maybe start with you in the seed phase.
Yeah, actually, we see a lot of those. It's something that we really look at. That's why probably at Inveready we offer different options in terms of just capital. We are really enabling a lot of public funds to really. When I said we are entrepreneur friendly, we want them also to not lose so much equity.
Could you make that exact? So what are we talking about in terms of equity stake?
In terms of equity stake, if we can take the less as possible, we would do that. We would encourage, like, for example, they take double of the amount in our capital than in public funds. That means if we can take a 10% of the company rather than an 18%, we would take 10% and try to encourage to give them like public help, public funding. So we see a lot of entrepreneurs that their cap table doesn't look good when they go to Series A. We want them to have like minimum 60%, 70% of ownership in the founders.
I think we have a quite international audience here today, and of course this depends on a city to city and a country to country level, right? Some markets are more developed, so you will see better players and less equity lost in the early stage. But maybe, Peter, from your perspective, what do you see, and what is it a no-go if a founder is too diluted already? Or is it?
Yeah, so if I think of Series A, it's actually a pretty important aspect for us because we really think that founders need to be incentivized long term, and it's basically their companies they founded, and they should be in it and should like have the highest stake and a significant stake at Series A stage. And if I think of numbers that we see, I think coming to Series A stage, obviously the higher the better. So if you have 80% or 90%, that's amazing. But I think I would say the bandwidth that we see is between 60 to 75% mostly. But we also see examples where it's below 50%. And if you are below 50% at the Series A stage, it's I would say it's difficult because you will dilute more in the future, and we typically would like founders to have more of their company at that stage.
I mean, you're the last person in from this group's perspective. What happens? I mean, what happens at your?
No, I think similar considerations. I think it's we definitely like and expect the founding team to have a significant holding in the business. It's I don't have a specific number in mind, but I think it's certainly in the higher double-digit percentage. I'm thinking if it has ever been a deal breaker, seeing a too low percentage from, I would say no, but I think it does raise questions, certainly.
If you look from that perspective, so I mean the markets are changing, we see decentralization setting in, we see things like fractional ownership, for example. I myself advise some founders right now that are thinking about different type of ways to incentivize employees via, equity pools, but then in a different way. Is it okay for let's say a CEO to have a big majority of the company, or would you like to see it more spread out? Or what's your take on that? Maybe Carolina, you can say something about that?
Yeah, I think that you always want there to be a really healthy option pool after a round for hiring, and then also you want to see that the key employees are well incentivized as well. I think if the founders are trying to hoard a lot of the options to themselves, it raises a flag of are they going to be able to hire the best people, because the best people really care about equity. And again, it depends. So I do a lot of deals in Brazil, and in markets like Brazil, people are still trying to understand what the value that equity actually has. And so in certain markets, it does depend. But I think you want to have that mindset that you want to give back to your team. And it's very important.
Fantastic. Let's see if there's any. I think there's mics in the audience as well. If there's anyone has a burning question for a panel, now will be the time. I see one person over here. Oh, well, yeah. Okay. Could you also tell me who you are? So I don't think that one is working.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, nice.
Excellent.
Guys, thank you for the presentation. It was really good. Talking about the future of funding, which we haven't at least heard anything about cryptos. I want to take your views on cryptos and the way many ventures right now are funding themselves with their cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, well, there's more panels on crypto and blockchain, so we try to avoid the subject a bit. So we managed to survive for 33 minutes. But no, since it's a valid question, I mean, something that I wanted to mention myself. Let's take that question and take it a bit broader. So what's your take on the current market? I mean, 2017, the first quarters, we've seen like a gigantic amount of ICOs, initial coin offerings, about 905, of currently which I think 50% is already out of market. What's your take on that? Should a founder go for that tokenization event? Should they see this as a great alternative towards VC?
Yeah, actually, for us as VCs, we don't see that as an enemy when we try to embrace it. We don't see it just as a new hype. It's basically a new technology era, and we're considering as a fund to tokenize actually our fund. It's an option that we're just trying to see how everything fits, how the regulations really let us work with that. though.
Then you would definitely be one of the first in the market to actually tokenize your fund, right? I mean, there's a couple of examples, Noi Fund, for example, Spice VC, but
Yeah, there are some, and so far it's something that we're not scared of. The problem is that we realize that this type of companies don't come to us as a VCs. They see us as a different world. So we just want to be sure that we can be approachable in the same way, and we have to proactively go to look for them and see and try to deliver the value that we are doing to our portfolio companies as well, rather than just having ICOs. So far, the first approaches that we have, it's good, and we just, it's still not public, but we just, our last investment is in the blockchain technology, so we'll see a lot of things coming up.
you cannot mention the name of that company.
I will have to kill you and everyone else.
Well, we'll hear about it in the news later on. Maybe your take on it, because I think, if you think about it, it's particularly interesting. So you raise your first seed round or angel round with informals. You might go for a seed investor like an angel, but then you can basically, when you're ready with your white paper and you have some traction, go for an ICO and basically circumvent the entire later stage VC industry. Does that scare you at all? Is there something that you're thinking about?
It's definitely something we're thinking about in the context of how to stay relevant, right? I think whether a centralized or a decentralized company, and no matter what product you're building, I think there are cases, and I think this goes back to what they were saying about venture capital as kind of an instrument, where there might be things that you want out of a venture capital firm that an ICO is not going to be able to provide.
For example?
Help with scaling, help with networking. I think there's all those things that venture firms do try to bring to bear, whether they do or not. I think we should ask the entrepreneurs, but that you're not necessarily going to get an ICO or the credibility for later funding rounds. So I think it really depends on what you're looking for as a founder and the trade-offs.
Peter or Giovanni?
Yeah, I think, first of all, it really depends on your business model. So if you're today a blockchain-based company, it's probably the business models that should think about an ICO. If you have really nothing to do with blockchain, it really is a question if you should tokenize your business model at all. And in terms of VC, let's say, versus ICO, I think in the future there will be a place where venture capital investments into equity and ICOs can coexist in harmony, and I think it will give startups where the one is more applicable and the others. And I definitely agree with Carolina here that VC can be quite comfortable in thinking about, you have, let's say, a centralized person or institution you can address versus maybe you have 10,000 investors who invested in your RCO, and that's your community who you really have to engage with, that you have to update. It's also a lot of work that comes with an ICO and with having so much more stakeholders than having, let's say, one or two VCs.
Yeah, no, I mean, exactly. We talked about it up front, but maybe Giovanni?
Yeah, sure. No, I agree. I think, look, if you are working on a decentralized project today and you actually have figured out a reason why you should have a token. So if you can actually make something out of it, for example, if it's a utility token where there is the token is actually used for as the purpose for, and if you are maybe from a country where you are actually might be struggling to attract venture capital money, I mean, why not doing it? I mean, it's not dilutive. It's effectively, I mean, I would say go for it, but but it's definitely not an ICO for everyone. I think it's.
No, I think I would agree with that. I mean, it's clearly an issue. I think a lot of founders, potentially in this audience, are also thinking about, I mean, give me that money, right? I'll write that white paper and that business plan. But if you think about it, I'd like to hear your perspective on that as well. So you write a white paper. It's essentially a business plan or a pitch deck that you have as a startup founder, which is not validated. You have the vision, but you have no idea where you're going toward, and you're already raising the capital based on that presumption. And then you have investors that expect you to go in a particular direction. You might not go there. So how would you tackle that? So how do you raise that capital and stick to a vision that, I mean, in the beginning, you don't really have that, right? So
you're technically raising an angel seed A and B round all together, or probably even C and D with an ICO. I mean, as a VC, we don't look at it. I don't particularly look at that space, but yeah, I wouldn't probably know how to approach it.
I guess, well, we'll have to just deliver our value by filtering.
Maybe just to dive into a little bit, because, I mean, what could be interesting to give our perspective on Let's say at the moment, of course, it's just the first wave of ICOs that we've seen, but just diving in from a principal perspective, what actually happens is the founders and the founding team and the developers have the money on the bank account the minute they do the ICO, and then where is the incentive to build the product? So how do we solve that in VC, and how can we help founders potentially solve that issue that the appetite to develop the product is actually gone when you're all multi-billionaires before actually having a product?
Something I'm very concerned of.
Yeah.
I think you still find that some companies who are raising ICOs actually want VCs to be in those ICOs because they still want that support without perhaps the dilution and the governance necessity. But we find lots of companies that could ICO and actually would prefer venture money or are in ICOs and want venture in it. It's helpful to have more people in that boat with you, as you say, that you can identify and you can reach out to. Otherwise, you have to really rely on that grit from the founder to stay focused.
Absolutely. So I think there was another question in the audience. So yeah, this gentleman over there was already waiting. Okay, yeah, go ahead. Please also say who you are.
Sure. So I'm Christian from Germany, currently doing my MBA at IESE Business School. I have a question. If I look in the VC space and I compare the American VC scene and the European VC scene, we see that in the US, last year there's been raised VC money, roughly 70 billion. In Europe, it's only around 10 billion. And if I look at the returns, I mean, American VCs have been outperforming European VCs forever, basically. Okay. And I'd like to hear your take on this. What's the reason? Is it because of the quality of the deal flow in Europe? Is it because the quality of the startups here, or is it because the VCs in Europe are not able to scale up their companies as quick as possible?
All right, great question. So, panel, what's your take on that?
So,
So the question is more, how do we see the relationship between the quality of Europe versus US in terms of both deal flow, quality of teams, and also the returns that are made? So the gentleman just stated that the US returns, although I don't really think it's, sometimes Europe actually outperforms the US in some cases, but that's more or less the question.
Outliers, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe if I start this off, I mean, it's obvious that there's a huge gap between the US and Europe, and that Europe compared to the US is still much more emerging, and that we haven't had so many, let's say, mega companies. Yeah. But I think it's catching up, and I mean, we now more and more see real big companies being built out of Europe. I mean, we had a couple of ones in Germany with Zalando, with Delivery Hero, HelloFresh.
IGN in the Netherlands. IGN,
who made significant IPOs, or one of our portfolio companies, Spotify, which is a strong contender to be one of the largest tech companies being built out of Europe. And I think those are those type of, let's say, aircraft carriers that can shape an ecosystem, raise ambitions, raise the bar, and let's say help to close that gap in the future. And
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think it's the US-style early-stage VC. It's a model that clearly kind of is based on the fact that you need some big outcome, right? And historically, Europe didn't have so many. The ecosystem is growing and is maturing. So I think as that happens, I think hopefully we will see many more big outcomes and the returns and everything else will improve. I think it's certainly it's the exit market in Europe has been healthy, but still it's not at that level that is not there yet to sustain probably enough return.
Could you say that, I mean, we lost the first battle then, Europe versus Fiesta, if you position it like that in terms of e-commerce and marketplaces and having a large market? But now with the next wave of technology, so if you move past the front end of the web and go to Industry 4.0 and that kind of topics, I think Europe could be potentially perfectly aligned in terms of fantastic universities and schools and education. Is that something that also excites you?
Yeah, I think that's probably the bet of everyone sitting on this stage, right? Is that talents in Europe. You have more developers in Europe than you have in the Silicon Valley for sure, and a lot of that talent had been in the Silicon Valley, and sometimes often returns home. Yeah. I think Europe has been hugely undercapitalized, so 14 times less capital here than in the US. And that doesn't help create big outcomes, right? So when you look at the number of outcomes above 3 billion in Europe, there have been very few, right? You could probably name them. And SAP was just the first European company to go above 100 billion, and that's, a relatively old business. But I think I would imagine that our bet is that gap is closing, and that there are companies, particularly in deep technology or marketplaces or those sorts of things, where you have big markets, you have a lot of talent, and that should shift.
Yeah. We have room for one final question, and the gentleman has been waiting all the time, so maybe you can give the mic to him. Could you please also tell us who you are?
Yes. Thank you. I'm Arthur Hendricks, InvestID. You were talking earlier about the control versus profit, at least the 70% that you were talking about in having control. Does it differ having control or having to be able to generate, to control the profit? And does it depend on the type of entrepreneur?
I'm not sure if I got that question correct. Maybe you could...
Well, okay, let me rephrase it.
Yeah,
you understand this better?
That's
okay,
better.
Great. You were talking earlier about the 70-60% that a founder should have as shares. And do you mean the actual control of the company, or do you mean the profit generating possibilities?
The question is it 60-70%?
And does it depend on the entrepreneur that you're looking at? Well, if he's incentivized in that.
No, if I understand correctly, like it's the percentage of equity tied to the percentage of control.
Yeah.
Which is something that we really appreciate, that it has a strong relationship, in the sense that we really want the person who owns also has the control of it. Like I don't know if that goes together, like that. We don't want like most of the team having most of the ownership, and then probably these ones won't be the ones leading the company in later stages.
Yeah. I think he's also talking maybe about different types of shares with voting rights or non-voting rights. Could that impact your decision in a positive or a negative way?
For us, it definitely would be negative. A sense of giving power to someone that really has not the control, even if it's no voting, but it's like you're not bringing the value on the company. You're not being the power horses on the company. You just have the voting, or you're step on a side. But it's like, what are you bringing? Probably the Series A guys can answer that better, but they probably want to see whoever is leading and whoever is owning the company is really bringing everything there. Otherwise, the company will go through some restructure process. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think that's correct. I think because we're almost close to rounding up, I think it would be nice to have one more question for the audience. So I think there's someone over there. I appreciate people sitting in front. So yeah, whoever has the mic first can take the final question.
Hi, my name's Ali. I'm the CEO and co-founder of CloudCath. We're in the medtech space, building a remote monitoring tool for home dialysis patients. We've raised over $1 million to date in multiple rounds of convertible notes, varying valuations. So the first question is, when would you like to see an actual priced round, or when would you demand a priced round in order to be comfortable with investing in terms of product stage? And the second part is that in terms of revenue generation assumptions, where we can be very aggressive and get perceived as delusional, or we can be conservative, and at this very early stage we can very easily justify both.
Yeah.
So how do you guys, usually I take this decision based on what I know about the investor. How do you guys avoid founders walking in and just saying what they think you want to hear?
I appreciate you putting the pitch in. That's excellent. That's the way you should do it. On the question side, anyone want to comment on that?
I think we talked about it goes back to the pitching, right? And I think we will always do our own analysis of what we think, but an exercise that we like to do with the founders is think about, as a founder, you usually have 200 different things that you're thinking about and tracking. We like to always ask our founders, what are the top 5? So if there were top 5 areas that you had to, for your next milestone, which is usually a next round or something like that, what would you have to achieve? And then we go through together and we think, what are the KPIs, what are the metrics you have to hit? And then we're sort of aligned on that. And usually, and of course you can be deceiving at that point, but usually when you go through that exercise, you really understand how data-driven the company is, what are the real gaps, what can we do to help? And it helps stay aligned during that journey. So then also I don't show up the first day of the board meeting and start talking about some metric we've never discussed.
Yeah. Fantastic. So to round this up, I'm going to ask you a simple but tough question. What's the most important criteria you're looking for in an entrepreneur in order for you to commit? You can give one characteristic of that. Maybe you can kick it off, Giovanni.
In an entrepreneur?
An entrepreneur.
Okay. Well, we've done, from the analysis we've done, I think the execution ability at the stage where we invest is one, it's very important.
So for you it's execution.
Yeah.
Peter?
Adding to this, high ambitions and being street smart.
Carolina?
I'd say tenacity. So having the ability to navigate really difficult times, because there are many.
Yeah. Angel?
And based on difference, US, Europe, I would say ambitious. It's
Fantastic. So I'll put in resilience myself, and with that we'd like to conclude the panel. So I'd like to thank Angel, Carolina, Peter, and Giovanni, and give them a big hand of applause.
Thank you.